Space is one of those things that I think almost everyone is inspired by, and if you asked people what was the most inspiring event in history, it was probably landing on the moon. You know, if you ask people anywhere, I'd say human spaceflight is the reason that SpaceX was created, and we're incredibly honored to partner with NASA and to make this happen.
Our vision is to create a reliable and affordable U.S.-based commercial human lunar transportation system that enables the exploration of the moon by humans from virtually any nation or any corporation or any individual wishing to accomplish objectives on the moon, including activities based around science, around business, around national prestige, and personal accomplishment.
It has so much to teach us about the origin of the Earth, the evolution of our solar system, the workings of small planets, and it may even teach us about the origin of life on Earth. And we also know that the moon's stores of resources, ranging from water that can fuel lunar bases to platinum and other exotic elements of economic value, are there in huge quantities. Simply put, the moon is of interest to both the scientific community worldwide and to the commercial development of space, and it's right around the corner. We can make it affordable for mid-sized countries like a Korea, for example, or like an Indonesia, or like a South Africa, and we could name a lot more, just go around the continents, to be in the business of lunar exploration.
Plans announced by NASA could see tourists paying more than 80 million Australian dollars to spend up to a month aboard the International Space Station. And if you have the cash, you could possibly make your out-of-this-world reservations as early as next year.
And we have engine ignition.
Want to travel in space? Soon it will be possible to buy time on the International Space Station. NASA announced plans on Friday to host 2 commercial missions a year, starting as soon as 2020 for those who can afford it. Private companies will arrange the trips, allowing space tourists to spend up to 30 days aboard the space station.
If you look at the pricing and you add it up back of the napkin, it would be roughly about $35,000 a night per astronaut, but it won't come with any Hilton or Marriott points.
And first, you have to get there. Boeing is one company planning to provide transportation at a cost estimated to be around $58 million per private astronaut.
Starliner is a new spaceship that Boeing is building to take astronauts to and from Earth, right, to the space station initially, and perhaps to private destinations or other destinations in the future.
That could appeal not only to space tourists, but also companies looking to manufacture products in microgravity, like TechShot, which makes 3D printers that manufacture human tissue. NASA came here to the NASDAQ to make the announcement. The space agency worked with a dozen companies to chart the course to a robust, low Earth orbit economy. But to make the plan work, they'll need even more companies willing to invest in space.
They also wanted to reach out to the non-typical space companies. We think there's entrepreneurs out there, we think there's startups, that when they see the benefits of what can be done in space, they recognize it's now not impossible for them to do research in space. They can take their creativity and move forward.
NASA hopes more private investment will mean the dawn of a new day in space travel, freeing up more money to fund the agency's goal of returning to the moon by 2024.
Houston station on Space to Ground.
Welcome to Space to Ground. I'm Dan Hewitt. What a way to end this decade in spaceflight. Boeing's CST-100 Starliner successfully returned after its first voyage to outer space. The mission started with a smooth ride uphill atop an Atlas V rocket, but experienced an issue shortly after separating. After flight controllers righted the spacecraft and put it in orbit, it was determined they wouldn't be able to successfully rendezvous and dock with the space station. But resolute to still accomplish as much as possible on the demo flight, teams executed a number of checkouts before guiding the capsule to a picturesque nighttime landing in frigid White Sands, New Mexico. It was a thrilling end to a jam-packed year for the International Space Station. In addition to Boeing's first Starliner flight, SpaceX conducted their first flight to and from the International Space Station earlier this year with their new Crew Dragon vehicle. Both flights continue to push us forward to once again launching crews to the station from America, with 2020 lining up to be the year we make it happen. Throughout the year, we saw 3 crews fly to the station on the Russian Soyuz, where they performed 11 spacewalks and welcomed 9 cargo vehicles from Northrop Grumman, SpaceX, Russia, and the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. And between it all, they worked on hundreds of experiments and technology demonstrations that benefit humans back on Earth and lay the groundwork for our mission to land the first woman and the next man on the moon under NASA's Artemis program. With all those accomplishments in the books, 2020 is poised to be a hallmark year in station history. We'll hit the ground running in January with spacewalks to finish battery upgrades and work on the alpha magnetic spectrometer. While back on Earth, SpaceX will launch Crew Dragon on its in-flight abort tests, one of the last major tests before putting humans on board. NASA astronaut Christina Koch will come home in February as the newest record holder for longest continuous spaceflight by a female astronaut, an inspiring end to her first mission. Then stay tuned for the first flights of astronauts with our commercial crew providers Boeing and SpaceX, the first time we'll send a crew to the station from the Florida coast since the space shuttle retired in 2011. And on November 2nd, we'll mark 20 unbroken years of humans living, working, spacewalking, experimenting, and flying in humanity's home, low Earth orbit. And that will do it for us in 2019. Thanks for following along and sending in your questions using the hashtag AskNASA. We'll see you next year.
Subscribe for more space.
Seven, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, liftoff.
And that was a simulation of SpaceX's first crewed flight of 2020. It was shared by CEO Elon Musk on Twitter earlier today. Also expected in 2020, at least 3 separate space agencies are planning to send robots to Mars. Joining me now from the Kennedy Space Center to explain all of this and more is CBS News space analyst Bill Harwood. Bill, let's start with the efforts by some of these private space companies to actually send astronauts into space. How do they plan to do this, and how significant is this?
Well, it's really hard to overstate the importance of this to NASA. The last time U.S. astronauts were launched on American rockets from U.S. soil was during the last shuttle mission back in July 2011. Ever since then, NASA's been paying the Russians to ferry astronauts to and from the International Space Station at prices of more than $80 million a seat. So they're very eager to get these new commercial cruise ships being built by Boeing and SpaceX off the ground. Now, as you said, SpaceX appears to be pretty close to launching. They have a critical test coming up in January where they're going to test the abort system of their Crew Dragon spacecraft while it's in flight. If that test goes well, presumably they'll be ready to launch 2 astronauts to the station sometime in the February, March, April time frame, something like that. We don't know for sure yet. And of course, if you recall, just a few weeks ago, Boeing launched its Starliner spacecraft on an unpiloted flight. It didn't go perfectly, but the capsule's safely back down on the ground, and they too are getting ready to launch astronauts. So hopefully, long answer to your question, sometime in the first half of 2020, we're going to see astronauts flying out of here, out of the Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and that's a very big deal indeed for NASA.
Absolutely. And NASA announced its plan to send astronauts back to the moon, but not until 2024. So what do they have to get done this year in order to keep on that timeline?
Well, they have to get a lot of money from Congress. That's the short answer. NASA haven't told us yet what the Artemis moon program is going to cost. The administrator, Jim Bridenstine, has promised an accounting when the federal budget comes out in February for fiscal 2020 and 2021. And so hopefully we're going to see numbers in that about just what it will cost. But the Trump administration asked for a supplemental $1.6 billion for NASA last year. They're getting $1.3 billion of that, and that's going to kickstart the development of the lander they need to carry astronauts down to the surface. So hopefully they're going to announce contracts for that lander in 2020, early 2020, and so work will get started on that while we have all this work by Boeing and SpaceX going on for the space station. So quite a lot going on right now for NASA.
But what about space tourism? Is 2020 going to be the year that this industry finally takes off?
Well, we think so. Virgin Galactic, that's the company owned by Sir Richard Branson, and Blue Origin, that's a company owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. Both companies are building suborbital rockets. In the case of Virgin, it's a rocket plane that would carry tourists up to above 100 kilometers or 62 miles or so. That's kind of the somewhat arbitrary definition of the boundary of space. Bezos' Blue Origin is doing the same thing with a different type of spacecraft. They've both flown multiple test flights, and I think everybody's very eager to see when they will begin launching tourists. You mentioned, can you afford it? That's a really good question. We think the initial tickets to ride on these rockets is, somewhere in the order of a couple of $100,000. But as time goes on, both companies think that price will fall, and at some point it may get down in the realm that I'll call it relatively normal people might be able to buy a ticket to space. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But first flights with customers on board should happen this year, in 2020, I mean.
Relatively normal. I guess it's all relative. All right, Bill, you're the expert. What else are you paying attention to in space in 2020?
Well, it's hard to turn our attention away from these human spaceflight programs. That's a very big deal and a big part of NASA's budget. But I think one of the clear highlights of the year is the launch of Mars 2020 lander. This is a robot that NASA is building out at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Scheduled for launch in July. It'll get there in 2021. And this is the first rover that they put down on the surface of Mars that's designed specifically to look for traces of past microbial life on the red planet. Obviously, if they found anything like that, that would be a milestone moment in the history of science. They're also going to actually collect samples and cache them. They're going to leave them for a future mission, perhaps, to come pick them up and bring them back to Earth. A very ambitious mission, very expensive mission. So we've all got our fingers crossed watching that one.
Fingers crossed. Ambitious indeed. Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
China's very own space station will soon be floating in outer space. According to Xinhua, the Chinese space station is expected to be launched in 2020. China plans to build the third multi-module space station in space following the International Space Station and Mir. The Chinese government plans to first launch Tianhe, or the core cabin module of the Chinese space station, by 2020. It will provide the life support system as well as the power of the station. The laboratory cabin module, Shenzhou and Tianzhou, will be launched subsequently. The module of the Chinese space station will be fully assembled in orbit. The station will be fully assembled between 2020 and 2022. The entire station will weigh about 60,000 kilograms and will have a lifespan of about 10 years. China has already launched Tiangong-1 in 2011 and Tiangong-2 in 2016 as test stations for the planned Chinese space station. More about space.
What's hiding on the dark side of Venus? For the first time ever, scientists are studying Venus's mysterious night side and have found that it's vastly different from its day side. It takes Venus 225 days to revolve around the Sun and 243 days to fully rotate on its axis. As a result, night and day on the planet last longer than on Earth. So far, the day side has been studied extensively, but the night side has been notoriously difficult to observe until now. Venus's atmosphere consists of strong winds blowing 60 times faster than the planet's rotation. This super rotation has been assumed to be uniform in both sides, but new data shows the winds are more chaotic and irregular on the night side. Night side clouds formed large, wavy, filament-like patterns, not seen in day clouds, and are dominated by stationary waves, which remain still and do not move with the atmosphere. Stationary waves are thought to form specifically over steep mountainous areas, but were recently detected in the planet's southern hemisphere, an area with low elevation. The waves were likewise assumed to be rising up through the cloud from the surface, but were mysteriously missing from the lower and intermediate cloud levels. Scientists have yet to explore what this means, but will likely need to come up with new, updated models of Venus to help them figure it out.
Now, where did that come from? Something, somewhere in deep space, just sent out the fastest radio burst on record. Trouble is, we don't know what its origin is. The strongest ever fast radio burst ever recorded by astronomers hit Earth earlier this month. Scientists say signal FRB 180309 was heard on March 9th. Its signal-to-noise ratio was 4 times larger than the previous strongest signal. Astronomers don't know what it is, but some speculate it could be anything from stars colliding to interstellar travel. What do you think it was?
Uncrewed spaceplane nails drop test. Scientists dropped this spaceplane from a helicopter over the Mojave Desert on Saturday. The privately built autonomous Dream Chaser spaceplane completed a free flight drop test in California on Saturday, November 11th. It can carry 7 passengers and looks like a smaller version of current NASA shuttles. Dream Chaser will use Atlas rockets to fly half a dozen delivery missions to the International Space Station by 2024. The test examined the plane during the final approach and landing phase of flight. The Dream Chaser was uncrewed, meaning it was flying on auto, but despite that, it pretty much crushed the drop test.
8,000 feet.
Copy 8,000. Good reader, all tenders.
Approach and land. PTIs.
Copy approach and land. PTIs are active.
End of PTIs.
Copy. PTIs complete.
400 feet.
Copy 400.
Landing gear.
Copy gear deploy.
Good gear deploy. 5 feet. Touchdown.
China goes to the dark side. China has deployed a relay satellite that's meant to bridge communication between Earth and a planned exploration on the far side of the moon. Xinhua News Agency reports Chiao, or Magpie Bridge, is named after a Chinese folklore in which magpies form a bridge to enable 2 star-crossed lovers to meet for one day. The Chiao satellite features a dish antenna and 2 solar arrays and was launched atop a Long March 4C rocket from southwest China on Sunday morning. Chiao is expected to enter a halo orbit around the second Lagrangian point and would be the world's first communication satellite operating in that orbit. Its main purpose is to establish a communication link between Chinese Mission Control and the yet-to-be-launched Chang'e 4 mission that will explore the moon's dark side. The Chang'e lunar rover and lander is currently scheduled for December 2018 launch. Chiao is also equipped with the Netherlands-China Low-Frequency Explorer, a radio scanner that will search for ancient radio signals dating back to the early universe. The reason the satellite is able to do this is because it would be in the shadow of the moon, completely unaffected by Earth's interference. Long day. New research shows that days on Earth are getting longer as the moon slowly spirals away from us. Due to gravitational forces between Earth and its satellite, the moon moves away at a rate of 3.82 centimeters per year, causing our planet's rotation to slow. According to NASA, Earth currently completes a full rotation on its axis every 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds. But researchers using astrochronology on geological rock layers found that when the moon was closer to Earth 1.4 billion years ago, a day was just over 18 hours. The length of a day has grown 1/75,000th of a second on average per year and is expected to continue at this rate for the next millions or billions of years. The moon will eventually stop moving when it reaches a stable distance from Earth. When this happens, the two will be tidally locked, rotating at the same pace, with the moon visible from only one side of Earth. Of course, that's assuming either of them survive the sun's destructive red giant phase.